this session of the Complaints and Conduct Committee. So just before we start, should I drop off the call, I think Colette will let all the attendees know, and the meeting will be paused until we get me back on the call, until I'm able to rejoin. Also, before we start, I would really like to welcome Stuart Houston to the committee as well. Stuart, congratulations on your appointment, and obviously this is your first committee in your new role, so we're very, very pleased to have you with us this morning. Okay, right, so running through the agenda in terms of apologies. I believe we have got the SPA board member Fiona McQueen, who can't be with us today. I have not been notified of any other apologies.
That's correct.
Which I think is correct, which is good. So before we continue, could I please ask any member or participant to declare any conflicts of interest or any connections in the business which we will be discussing today? And I can see none. In terms of any other business, I've been notified of no other business. So, and our next decision then is around taking the business in private, and that's for the items 8 to 11 on the agenda, in accordance with section 20 of our standing orders. So are members content to take these items in private? I take that as consent. Very good. Right. So into minutes and actions for previous meeting then. So 2.1 meetings of the Complaints Conduct Committee from the 1st of June. May I please invite members to approve the draft minutes of the Complaints and Conduct Committee as an accurate record? I think everybody is content, which is good. And then similarly for 2.2, the public minute from the private meeting of the committee held on the 1st of June. And again, are members content to approve it as an accurate record? Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So, which leads us on to 2.3, the actions log and matters arising. Now, there is a number of actions there. 4 actions are proposed for closure and 8 actions are proposed ongoing. So, I suggest that we step through them to make sure everybody is content with the recommendations. And we can see if we've got any overarching comments on the actions log as well. So in terms of running through as they're presented in the papers, from the last committee, action 001. So that's the Police Scotland Performance Report, give consideration to how Police Scotland can present data around regularity in procedure and quality of service complaints on a more regular basis. Now, this one, there is some narrative which has been provided, but it is proposed ongoing, and it seems like this action actually links to the action below. Grant, please.
Thanks, Chair. This is possibly as much of an overarching comment as anything else. There are several dates, so there are several actions proposed ongoing, but we don't have any clear idea of a tentative date for these. And I think it would be helpful for us to be able to monitor progress or otherwise if there was a date given against each of them when it's continuing.
Excellent point, Grant. I think absolutely valid and very, very consistent with my observations as well. Where we have an expected date of completion and the actions proposed ongoing, we do not have any indication as to what the revised timescales are. And I think it would be incredibly helpful for the committee to have a revised date going forward, recorded for that. So thank you, Grant. I think so this action is proposed ongoing, and absolutely agree that it needs to remain obviously ongoing. It is interestingly linked, I think, to the action below as well, which again refers to PSD engaging with SPA complaints team to confirm a date prior to November meeting and agree format information required at the session. Again, I think, Grant, that really illustrates your point that we have something happening before the November meeting, but we're not, are we going to get an update in November? Is it going to be afterwards? So yeah, so I think I see Kat nodding there, so thank you. I think, yeah, I think the point has been made. Um, so moving on to action 003, which is around the national governance structures, and how they relate to an impact assessment against the Angiolini recommendations, effectively. Darren, you have provided an update on this. And again, a very, very similar point applies to this as well. It's proposed ongoing, but it's due for closure today. So again, we need to understand exactly what will be happening within that space. Darren, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the action in terms of engagement with Scottish Government has taken place. It's correct that they are looking at a whole system approach in terms of how the impact of discharge recommendations will ultimately, once they're all discharged, be measured. But recognised that should not necessarily stand in the place of business as usual governance arrangements within respective partner organisations. The reason I've left that as ongoing is they confirmed an intention to convene an extraordinary meeting of the National Governance and Reporting structures to discuss this further in the autumn, date still to be determined. So I would absolutely be clear that I'll come back with an update there. Technically, the action's discharged, but I just wanted to recognise that the answer to the question isn't yet entirely clear.
Okay, well that's a helpful update. So thank you for that. Okay, so I think we're content to keep it ongoing on that basis. Okay, so 004, ensure a public report in relation to continuous integrity screening returns to the committee in due course. Now, again, this was one of those, was expected date of completion today. The update says that it is scheduled for November 2023. May I just ask, our police colleagues, is that still the plan, or has there been any update?
Chair, yes, I can absolutely confirm that. We were going by the Complaints and Conduct Committee work plan that the paper is scheduled to be returned in November, so we'll be prepared to provide that then.
Okay. And there are no impacts in terms of any national collation of the data that presumably will be included in this report.
Yeah, by that point we'll be well informed of what the UK plan is, but I think, to be honest, that will be a holistic update about the professional boundaries work, which we can include something about the continuous integrity screen exercise as well.
Okay, well that's really helpful then. Just on that basis, I mean, I suppose, I'm happy to keep it ongoing for the time being, but if this is something that we will be including into the work plan, I think at some stage the requirement for this action will cease. As long as it moves out of the action log and into our work plan on a regular basis. So again, happy to keep it ongoing for the time being, but I think in November we should be keeping an eye on this and then closing it and moving that into the work plan as a regular item, if members are content with that. Lots of nodding, very good. Okay, so 005, give consideration to how diversity information can be drawn for both officers and complainers. Now, I know this has obviously been one that's been around in various guises, and I see members would like to come in on this action. Katrina, please.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple of things around this, which was about reporting on this to the committee, because I think my understanding is you used to do that, and then that was stopped. So it was really to ask what could we reinstate that reporting, please? And well, unless there's a very good reason for it being dropped, which would be good to know. And then again, as Grant raised at the beginning, do we have a time frame for when the more detailed reporting on the information is likely to be available? Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. And Grant.
Thanks, Chair. My point was really more in relation to the fact that diversity is one of the issues that was raised by the former Chief Constable, expressing some concern. So the fact that we don't have this information in the public domain, I think, is less than ideal. So I'd be very keen that one way or another we are able to provide some information, even if it's not perfect, to have this available in the public domain to perhaps help the board members, but also help other interested parties.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Katrina and Grant, for your points. Katrina, would you like to come in again? You've got your hand still up. Legacy hand. Fabulous. So absolutely. As I say, I think this action has been around in kind of various guises for a while now, and I know that obviously. So we've been waiting for upgrades. So technology is obviously an enabler, but at the same time, I think what the points that members are making is that we need to understand, even if technology goes live by October, there will be a lead-in time to some degree before maybe some of the data can be captured in the required format before things can be extracted. So I based on this, I would be expecting something to be available in November. Now, I don't know if that's realistic. So I think the points that have just been made by members are twofold. One is this: whatever we had previously, and I appreciate it wasn't perfect, but is it possible to reinstate some of the diversity data into our reporting again based on whatever mechanisms we had previously? That's the first one. And the second one, just as far as possible, a really clear commitment to, once technology goes live, and that's expected then, what are the timeframes for actually some of that data being visible? So again, so we've got a bit of a line in the sand, and we've got something to work towards, that we can understand, if we are making progress or not. Because again, so this isn't a bashing session, but drift and delay is a concern with these things. So we're just really quite keen to kind of say, right, this is when we can expect this. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Police Scotland performance report. So engage with SPA colleagues, and this one is proposed for closure. So I don't think there's any concerns to close that one, which is good. So Police Scotland, so 007 Police Scotland performance report, and that's about reviewing how the recommendations noted have been reversed as a result of new data being presented by Police Scotland. So and I can see that it's proposed ongoing work is happening in the space. Now, I know we will be talking about the Police Scotland performance report as a substantive item, so we can probably cover, I think, maybe some of the observations people might have to this specifically as part of that more substantive item. I think this specifically relates to the fact that Police Scotland have been changing the format of the report at the request of the committee, and which was gratefully received, and we think it's definitely moving in our direction. But as part of that, obviously some data hasn't quite made it through in the new format. So I think this is what it relates to, and I really do think that it's appropriate to keep it ongoing and have a more fulsome discussion as part of the report, if members are content with that. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So ensure 008, ensure the number of officers for each command area is highlighted when referring to complaints received within each command area. So this one is discussions, it proposed ongoing discussions and planning is ongoing with an analysis performance unit. I again, I have full sympathy for legacy systems and issues with data and the like. I do wonder again if we are trying to get sort of, if perfection is the enemy of good in this case, because effectively, I think if I remember correctly from last time, we were basically saying we need to have some reference points for each of the regions at the very least, because without that, it's difficult to understand if, for example, a number of complaints is proportionate per head of number of officers. So something to give us a bit of a proportionality to the number of complaints, I think would be really useful. So again, I suppose the steer from the committee is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, and something to give us a ballpark reference point is much more useful than trying to be perfect and it taking a longer period of time. So I hope that members are content with that steer. Okay. So PC vetting overview, bring forward a number of people with protected characteristics have failed vetting. So this one is proposed to close. Katrina, would you like to come in on this, please?
Sorry, yes, my cursor was doing something very strange there. I wasn't really meaning to kind of keep flashing my hand up. Yeah, I have some concerns about this. I'm just wondering why it's being closed when the ask has not actually been completed. I understand. So the vetting unit currently does not hold data. I mean, I think it's a whole area. The vetting is a whole area that obviously is really really crucial, and it does come into as Grant referenced the retired Chief Constable's statement about discrimination. So I think in terms of public assurance, this is the kind of information that would be really helpful going forward. So I would actually suggest that this is not closed unless there is some other route to that information, that data being collected within another, like I say, unless there's another route to that and the reporting back. So so it's really an ask for a bit of clarity around that, please.
Thank you, Katrina. Kat, you'd like to come in? Oh, and you're on mute.
Thank you. Just for clarity regarding Action 8, absolutely confirm that we'll be able to provide some more detail around about officers' headcount in each command area. I think, to be honest, we have overcomplicated that, so we'll be able to provide that for the next committee meeting. In terms of the diversity data, so it is collected by recruitment at the moment. It's not shared over routinely with venting. If that helps to clarify anything, Katrina.
No, that does say so in this paper here. But I suppose my question is then, as it was asked for previously, is there a reason why this can't be pursued? And if there isn't a sound reason for it not being shared and this item being moved forward, then could we please keep it open?
Thank you, Katrina. I'll let Grant come in. Grant, you're on mute.
Sorry, first time today. Beg your pardon. Chair, thank you. I would also support that. The fact that the information is not currently shared doesn't mean, to me, a good enough reason for not actually bringing this forward in some shape or form. Given, again, retired Chief Constable's particular comments on this, there's a lot of interest in this sort of area. And I think to say that it's available in vetting but not shared, I don't think is an acceptable answer.
Thank you, Grant. I think it's the other way around. It's available in recruitment, but not vetting. I think that's what Kat said. Yeah, but it's a very no, not at all. But I think the sentiment which is being expressed here, the position of the committee is that the reason I think we asked for this, the ask is to see if there is any diversity information that flows through the recruitment process and the vetting process, which might help identify a bias of some sort. So it's really understanding whether or not our processes. Katrina, you would like to come in?
Sorry, Chair, but just to add, or if there is no bias, just to evidence that there is no bias is, to look at it in a positive way. But it's certainly, it is an area of great interest at the moment, and that public assurance would be really, really helpful, I think.
No, I think it's a very good point. It's whichever way it is. We're trying to interrogate. We're trying to assess if there are any biases. It's a very valid point, Katrina. We're trying to assess if there are any biases in our processes. I find it interesting that we don't overlay the vetting with the recruitment data, because then that to me means, how can we be certain that there are no biases in our vetting process? It's not to say that there are, it's not to say that there aren't, it's just, unless this data is present and somebody, in a format in which somebody can look at it and people do look at it, I think it's very difficult to evidence that there are no biases. So yeah, so that's what we're asking for it. So I propose that we do keep it open, even if we need to tweak the wording of it. possibly in an offline session. But it's just, so we're after understanding, are there any biases? So this data, that's a way of getting to that question, and that's really what we're after. Paul.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Do we need to be stronger on this, and rather than just keep it open so it just hangs there, actually give an instruction to go back at it and look at this again?
A very valid point.
I can understand why vetting don't have access to equalities data, because you want them to be absolutely neutral. But at some stage, it can't be that problematic for an analyst further down the process to match these up and superimpose them and get some, as you say, ballpark figures, which is really all we're after.
Exactly. Right. Absolutely. So in that case, we ask for a for a solution to be presented. So thank you for that really useful debate, and I think incredibly relevant and highly in the public interest. So thank you for that. Action 010. So SP performance report reflecting presentation of data held. Of data in relation to complaints upheld and not upheld with the report going forward. So report narrative update to provide clarity on the outcome of allegations. This one is being proposed for closure. I see no issues with not closing it, so thank you very much for that. We're happy to close this one. Thank you. Action 11, so that's the PERC performance report. Consider and present data to provide assurance to the committee that complaints are handled in a risk-based manner and resources are prioritised accordingly. So this one is being proposed for closure. What's the perception from the committee on this? Do people feel that what's being proposed, that we're satisfied? I mean, there is an explanation here, which is good, because I think it is but it is more of a qualitative in nature. I do wonder to what degree this is information that is operationalized, because so with the daily triage is really good to understand. I do wonder, as I say, because at the moment this closes off the action, but I do wonder if there is any way of presenting this information to the committee for scrutiny on a more regular basis. Grant, please.
Thanks, Chair. The PERC performance report is actually later on the agenda, and there are one or two comments I've got on that specifically at that stage. So perhaps we could consider, after we consider the PERC report this time, whether we are happy to close this item or ask for further clarification in certain areas.
It's a very, very good suggestion, Grant. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, I do feel like it warrants some further discussion, and I agree that it's best to do it when we cover the PERC report. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so we're suspending decision as to whether or not we're content to close it until we cover the more substantive item. Okay, which leads us to Action 12, which is police content organisation and learning. So consider and discuss with colleagues around how to best inform members around the output of this work from an assurance perspective. This one is proposed ongoing. Again, I can see from the update that work has happened within the space. But I think, and at the very least, the expected completion is November for this one. So we shall be waiting with bated breath until the November committee to see what to have a more fulsome update within the space. So yeah. So thank you very much for that. I think Gosh this covers this agenda item. So that's very good. Now this enables us to move on to the next one. Decision since last meeting. I don't think there have been any decisions made, certainly that I would like to notify the committee of. So nothing to report from that perspective, which means that we can move on to agenda item 3, and that is the Police Scotland Professional Standards Quarterly Performance Report. So that's over to our Police Scotland colleagues. Kat, is that you who will be covering this?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. This is the second contribution in the new template in terms of our performance report. So we continue to seek and welcome feedback around about the content, and we're more than willing to tweak and adapt it to meet the needs of the committee. The performance report reflects the reporting period of the 1st of April to the 30th of June this year, so quarter one. During that time, you've got the full detailed template. 1,640 complaints have been received. That's representative of a 4.1% decrease in the previous year to date and a 1.4% decrease against the 5-year average. You'll note that the number of allegations are down by 20%, which seems to be quite significant. However, we would point out that there has been an administrative backlog with some of the recording, which is reflective in that statistic, and we're optimistic that that will even out through the next quarter and beyond. Of that, 41.9% of complaints were frontline resolved, which is a reduction on the previous year to date of 51.3%. Our assessment and analysis of complaints and the detail round about that slight reduction in FLR absolutely relates to the complexity of the complaints that we're now starting to see, as well as changes in expectations from complainers, which is making it increasingly difficult to deliver on FLR. Approximately 2.5% of the complaints were subject to CHR, and a total of 41 CHRs were received year to date, with 64.4% of the allegations reviewed being found to be handled to a reasonable standard. 84 statutory referrals were made to PERC, which is an increase of 20%. This is largely driven, as we've reported previously, in terms of the increase in taser discharge instance experienced year on year, which is largely attributed to the increase in taser officers that are trained across the organisation and across the whole of Scotland now, as well as the prevalence of mental health incidents where we're experiencing vulnerable members of the public perhaps in possession of weapons, etc. So in terms of management of that incident, sometimes there's no other alternative but to administer taser. That attributes to the uplift in the relevant numbers of taser discharge referrals. Only 7.4% of the referrals roundabout tasers have been subject to PERC investigation, so I hope that that gives the committee a degree of assurance in terms of the proportionality and appropriateness of the situations where taser is being used. In terms of the conduct position, 64 officers are currently suspended and 102 are subject to restrictions as at the 1st of July of this year. 8 misconduct hearings in respect of gross misconduct carried out year to date, and the disposals are outlined within the report. Moving on to the breakdown of complaints received on page 3, a total of 1,640 complaints have been received year to date. That shows a 4.1% decrease from the previous year and 1.4% decrease in the 5-year average. Service outcome allegations are assessed as the key driver in the overall decrease, alongside the reductions in irregularity in procedure, incivility and service delivery. A total of 687 of those were frontline resolved, which is 41.9% compared to 51.3% in the previous year to date. In terms of the breakdown of key themes round about that, in North East Division we noticed there was a 27.1% decrease in the previous year to date, which drives the overall decrease in the North Command. It should be noted, however, that complaints in North East Division were at an all-time high in 2022-2023 against the other 4 years. So it looks as if this figure is actually starting to be representative of the norm. In terms of emerging trends, policy and procedure allegations have increased by 3% against the previous year to date, with 205 being received this year to date versus 109, so the change is marginal. The low volume increase nationally has been driven by changes in the West, in Lanarkshire, Ayrshire and Greater Glasgow. We did do a bit of a deeper dive into those changes just to look at what the drivers were in Lanarkshire, Ayrshire and Glasgow. We found that where there was matters reported to police where the complainer was subject to police action, subsequent complaints emerged regarding property damage which had been linked to forced entry, where the police had concern for a person or legitimate possession of a warrant, etc. Also where the police had attended in respect of noisy or disturbance circumstances, and the subsequent complaints about police presence, contact from both occupants or indeed neighbours, etc., who perceived that they were disturbed by our presence. And there was also follow-up complaints regarding lack of police action, predominantly around these neighbour issues, reports of road traffic matters, assault and theft. There was also lower volumes in terms of complaints about productions, where predominantly the issue was that they hadn't been, or complainers were aggrieved that the productions had not been returned to them. In terms of service delivery, 149 allegations out of the 1,053 were upheld, representing a decrease in the previous year to date, which was 16%, and the fight against the 5-year average was 15.3%. The largest volume categories were linked to irregularity in procedure, which contained 58 complaints, service delivery 38, and service outcome 23. In terms of complaint handling reviews, there was a total of 41 CHRs were received year to date. That's a reduction of 10.9% against the previous year, and 64.4% of the allegations reviewed were found to be handled to a reasonable standard, which is a reduction of 12.2% in the previous year to date. Despite that decrease, the rate of allegations handled to a reasonable standard remains at a high level, and throughout 2022-2023 with monthly rates of 62.1% upwards. There's a total of 73 recommendations and 14 learning points have been received year to date. The majority of those learning points and recommendations were categorised as relating to further inquiry or matters requiring a fuller further response to complainers. In terms of the detail round about PERC referrals, a total of 84 statutory referrals were made to PERC during the year to date. It's a 20% increase in the previous year, and again that increase is articulated as increase in taser discharges. There has been no specific geographical trend identified as a result of this increase. In terms of the conduct matters, we'll obviously cover that in more detail later on in the meeting, but 64 officers suspended, 102 officers restricted, and we'll cover that in more detail further on. Organisational learning, you'll see on page 9, we have circulated and disseminated 5 pieces of organisational learning across the organisation, and we'll summarise that for members on page 9. If there's any questions, happy to take that, or if anybody needs any further detail. In terms of continuous improvement, we continue to work our way through the PSD Preventions and Professionalism campaign. We are currently addressing the professional standard of behaviour, honesty and integrity, which is standard number 9. In a couple of weeks' time, we intend to move on and address the staff code of conduct in terms of raising awareness, similar to what we've done with the other 9 standards of professional behaviour. And thereafter, we'll move on to the 10th standard of professional behaviour to round matters up, which relates to challenging and reporting improper conduct. We have published the 2nd edition of the conduct outcomes as well, and also published the 2nd edition of the PSD standard newsletter, which is another medium where we can convey some prevention messaging across the organisation to help prevent and intervene and just prevent matters occurring. We are formulating a framework in terms of measurement of success or outcome of the campaign. So far, the click-through rates have been examined. We are quite pleased with the level of interest in all the matters and all the products across the campaign. The click-through rates are really favourable and really competitive against any other campaign in the organisation, which is really positive, and we'll be able to provide members with a more succinct insight into the nature of that in November when we update you on the professional boundaries work. We have also delivered some additional bespoke complaint handling training to our officers in Incaru, which has been subject of really positive feedback and really welcomed by the team as well. And it's now confirmed that we will include that as part of the new style PSD induction programme, which we're going to be rolling out in November of this year. Members, that is a high-level summary of the content. More than happy to take any questions.
Sorry, apologies. Thank you very much, Kat, for the report and for the narrative as well. I see a number of members would like to come in with questions. Katrina, please.
Yes, thank you. Chief Superintendent, thank you very much for the report. I thought it was, I think it's really good. I think it's really clear and systematic, and I really enjoyed, reading it and listening to your report this morning. I wanted to make a comment, which is, I know we've said it before, but I think it's always worth saying that for a police force of this size and the population that we have, the scale of what we're dealing with, that these are actually quite small numbers. And I just think it doesn't mean they're not important. But I think it is worth a comment. I wanted to just clarify something with you around the use of tasers and the increase. I suppose I'm curious to know, is this increase entirely down to increased, so more police officers are getting trained in the use of tasers, which means they're being used more, or there is the potential for them being used more because of that? And do you think that entirely accounts for the increase, or is there an element of increased problems with mental health and people needing that kind of intervention? So that was one of my questions, and you won't be at all surprised that my other question, referring to page 10, is the upgrade to the PSD database. So I just wondered if you were able to provide any kind of sense of timescale for when that is going to actually be in place. Thank you.
Thank you. To give you some sort of sense in terms of the training implications for taser officers, Katrina, the Chief did commit to, by 2024, having 500 to 2,000 officers trained in taser. So at the moment, we're currently seeing 1,357 is the actual figure that are trained across the nation at the moment. So that clearly attributes to the propensity for use of taser out there when we're dealing with incidents. You broke up at the next part of your question. I don't know whether you would mind reshaping that again, Katrina. Apologies.
Okay. Well, I suppose I wanted some clarity whether it was possible to understand that is the use of taser to do with the numbers of officers who are now have that capacity, and therefore they use taser as against whatever they might have done previously, or whether there's a sense that actually incidents requiring that kind of intervention are actually on the increase. But if it was the next bit was the upgrade to the PSD database, which my question was around. So that's page 10. To upgrade the bespoke database used to record and track complaints and conduct, so including the ability to enhance recording and analysis of diversity data, ensuring the organisation has an enhanced understanding of any emerging trends. And as I said, you'll not be surprised that I'm asking that question, but it would be good to know if there's any kind of time frame for that.
Yeah, of course. So we are working really hard to get that in place as quickly as we can. We do seem to be on track for October now, Katrina. There is meetings carrying on every week. There's one actually today. We are having some testing issues, but we're trying to work through those as a collective and with the service provider. So I would say with a degree of confidence that October seems realistic.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Katrina and Kat, for that. Grant, please.
Thanks, Chair. Kat, could I also say how easy the report is to read? I like the use of graphics, and it's very logically set out, so that's extremely helpful. The area I just wanted to explore a little bit more is actually links to one of your closing remarks about additional training and complaint handling, because I noticed that on slide 3, the third bullet suggests a decline in frontline resolution. And I wondered if the additional training is as a result of this, or is there anything you could add as to, have you got a target for a higher percentage resolved by frontline resolution so that we can get a better feel for that?
We welcome an increased level of frontline resolution. I think we all know research tells us, Grant, that the earlier we can get in and resolve matters, the more satisfied a member of public would like to be. So it's definitely our preferred mode where it's a proportionate and realistic outcome. Then I think it suits everybody's agendas. The member of the public is satisfied because they're getting a quick and early resolution from us, and it saves everybody embarking in what can become a long and more drawn out process, which is perhaps not as efficient as FLR would be. So our aspirations would be to secure as much as we can resolution via FLR.
Thank you. Could I just follow that up by it's dropped from 51% to 41%, but that's only in one period. So I'm not trying to read too much into that, but it would be helpful to understand whether, with all the training that's going into this and the focus on it, whether there's a target of, and I'm making this number up, so that please don't think it's anything specific, is it to get it up to more like 60% of situations resolved that way? Because I think that would give us a better feel for how the focus of efforts going in, and some way of measuring the effectiveness of the additional training.
I would really like to say 60%, but we've always sat round about the 40%, Grant, as far as I'm aware. There's no doubt we're seeing a change in the nature and the complexities of some of the complaints now as well, which is going to make it even more challenging. Our aspirations, every case is different, and we need to treat everyone on its own individual circumstances. I think it would be impossible for me to set a target at the moment, but what I would definitely say is that we endeavour to work really hard to FLR as many as we can, as early as we can. And in terms of the training that's been carried out, then yes, we hope that once we embed that more thoroughly, that will help additional skill sets across the workforce and perhaps impact positively on FLR success.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Grant, and thank you, Kat. Are there any further questions from members at this stage? Okay, so I mean, I've got just a few observations from me as well. So as members have expressed, and as I've mentioned earlier when we were talking about the actions, we fully acknowledge that this report is an evolution. So the format has changed; it's much easier to digest. So from my perspective, certainly this report fulfills two almost primary purposes. On the one hand side, it shows us a picture across the number of complaints that we receive, which is an indication, I suppose, to some degree. It's a measure of satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the service that Police Scotland provides to our communities, and that is incredibly important. But that's just sort of one element of it. And the second element is around what it says about the effectiveness of the performance of our complaints handling systems. And I think we're kind of still on that journey now. With regards to the first one, Kat, what was going through my head as you were, as I say, giving us that really kind of, providing the narrative and the rich picture around what the numbers are doing. So I think what would be helpful again is to reintroduce some of the trend analysis that we had previously, and again think about, is it possible to do in a graph form? because I think that's probably lost a little bit, the report has lost a little bit of its impact. But I think also related to that is where I think the next level of evolution would be, other than kind of, reinstating some of the things. So I think, as I say, trend analysis, breakdown by different allegation, again, which we used to have in the wording form, but we don't necessarily have in the graph form. So those are really important things. But also going forward, and that's kind of the next evolution, is there will always be natural variation. So assuming our service remains constant, there will naturally be fluctuations. That's what we're seeing. As you said yourself, 3% up, 3% down. It's if we've got a baseline of complaints and we know what that roughly is by allegation, then we need to define what we think is an acceptable number up or down, because that will just be normal deviation in the course of business. And then if we do have spikes that go above that significantly, then that's obviously something for us to look at. But similarly, for consideration, what I'd be really interested to understand is if there are any policing initiatives or any changes in our operational procedures and the way we operate and the number of officers, etc., where we can forecast, or where we might expect that there may be an increase in complaints. So it's trying effectively to link our actions. Or similarly, if we start doing things differently, let's say we adopt a different policy, would we expect the number of complaints that's relevant to that policy to change? So appreciate it's a complex system and there will always be limitations around data, but I think it would be really helpful to think along those narrative, to really understand, just to make it a slightly more sensible measure of how satisfied or dissatisfied are the public. So where, rather than just normal variation, is there anything we've done differently that is likely or has led or is likely to lead to more complaints or less complaints? So that's, I know it might sound a bit aspirational at this stage, but I don't see why we shouldn't be over time aiming towards that, particularly as we improve our systems and our technology. So it's really that overlaying of cause and effect, I think, that we're really after, because I think that's what the Angiolini kind of recommendations relevant in the space where we're kind of referring to as well. So that's my first kind of point. The second point, and we've kind of touched on this as well already a little bit, is around the performance management element, because I think at the moment what we're clearly, very, very clearly seeing is that there has been an improvement in terms of the introduction of a national unit. I think we as members of the committee can now kind of we've got a high degree of confidence that all of the concerns that are coming in are being captured. We've got a high degree of confidence that they're subject to the same procedure. So there's more consistency in terms of how they're recorded, how they're managed, how they're resolved, etc. So that's incredibly valuable information for us. If I link that back again to we've got two outstanding recommendations from Dame Alice Angiolini's review. One relates particularly around SPA needs to challenge where things are not being done in a timely fashion. So timelines will become a really important focus for us. I think we need to include something into the reporting to enable us to discharge that recommendation. I don't think we can do it currently with the data that's presented to us at this stage. So I would quite like to have a firm commitment that between the SPA officers and Police Scotland officers, we arrive at a data set presentation of data around timelines that enables the SPA to fully say, right, we're quite comfortable that we understand the timing elements in that complaints management process. So that's one part of it. And the second part of it also relates to the accuracy of the complaints management process. And what I mean by that, and Kat, I mean, you alluded to that a little bit in your narrative as well. It's around, so at the moment we get quality data on the handling of complaints primarily from PERC, so where reviews are being undertaken and they say, well, it's either 6% have been handled to reasonable standard or not. I would be really, I think, as a committee, I and the committee would be really interested to understand what is it internally that Police Scotland measures from a quality perspective, because there's high volumes going through. I know there's, obviously stretch in resources, etc. So it would be really helpful for us to understand how does Police Scotland internally measure quality, because also we do dip sampling, etc. So there is different data points. But the reason why we are interested in this, because that would enable you to define your performance measures. So again, at the moment, I'm not quite clear what the targets are for Police Scotland other than the statutory kind of targets. And without having a clear understanding of what you would consider to be good performance, it's very difficult to have any consideration of continuous improvement, etc. So we're a little bit, at the moment, we're getting the volume data, but it's really difficult to understand whether you would consider that you're doing, well, or somewhere in the middle, or not so well. So there is still a little bit to do, because that would enable us to discharge another recommendation that is still sitting there, which is around genuine performance management. And I think, at the moment, it would be a bit of a stretch to say that, we have performance management, because we don't necessarily have clear targets. And it's difficult to understand where you are against your own kind of targets. So I don't think they're insurmountable questions, because I'm confident that the data is there. So we just need to get that presentation of data to us over the line, because again, I'm conscious of a bit of a drift and delay. There's 2 recommendations outstanding, and we should be able to do better, because there isn't really anything that stands kind of in our way. And again, I think a really good approach is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So that's kind of my challenge. I would quite like to have seen some progress by the next committee. At the very least, if we don't have everything, if we don't have everything in place, at the very least, a firm commitment as to when we're likely to have some of that in place, because again, as we're seeing, it will help us with our conversation and iteration, etc. So apologies for the monologue, but I just think it's such an important report, and we've seen so much good work go into this, real improvements, but we do need to do that extra bit to really enable us to discharge our recommendations. So I hope that that's not unreasonable. Thank you. Any further comments or observations on this? Stuart, please.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. No, let's really say thanks. I know this should have been me delivering the report today, but obviously I've been in post for just over a week, so maybe not have done it the justice that Kat has. So thank you for her for doing that. I'm really sort of helpful for me looking at some of the actions that have been discussed in the comments from the members is really some of the stuff we can take forward. So thank you for that, and I'm really keen at how we can answer some of this. So, but just to really pass on my thanks to Kat for doing that on my behalf.
Thank you, Stuart. Okay, well, so I think we will have captured some actions. I can make sure with Colette that we are, we'll refine the wording so we're exactly clear as to what we're committing to, etc. And obviously in conjunction with the Police Scotland colleagues, so we can do that. Right. So I think this enables us to move on to the next agenda item, which is 4, and that's the SPA quarterly report. So, Darren, I believe you're talking to this point, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'll take the report as read. This is our regular quarterly report, which includes key statistics reflecting the position at the end of Q1 and provides comparison to the previous 7 quarters. So looking at the statistical information contained within your report and looking at that broad 8-quarter period, everything I'll cover by way of summaries is in the context of recognising that the numbers of complaints that we receive are generally fairly low in number. So within the period of time presented, relevant complaints and allegation volumes remain largely consistent over the period. The majority of those have related to senior officers, although, as I say, volumes remain low. In terms of the categorisation of complaints, the vast majority relate to on-duty complaints. The remaining 7% minority complainer satisfaction with the quality of service received. In terms of complaint outcomes, early stage resolution, which is our equivalent of frontline resolution, continues to be an effective means of addressing complaints of a less serious nature where that's appropriate, and that relates to 43% of all allegations received having been resolved through that apology, explanation or reassurance. Of the 11 complaints which were closed over the reporting period, 82% of those were completed within the 40 working day target period, and you'll see within the report actually those that were out with that period are quite some time back in terms of that 8-quarter period, with explanation provided in broad terms for that. And just to conclude on the statistics, there are no relevant complaints which are ongoing at the end of the quarter. In terms of some other key areas of work, a statement on the suitability of Police Scotland complaints handling arrangements has been included in the draft SP annual report and accounts for 22-23. Members will be aware that was a previously discharged recommendation from the Dame Eilish report, and this will be the second instance in which the committee has made such an assessment. And a more detailed committee-specific annual report which supplements the data we're able to include within the annual report and accounts for the authority as a whole, will be considered later in the meeting, with a view to publishing that as soon as possible thereafter. The National Complaints Handling Development Group members will be aware that was paused last year to allow us to kind of take stock of the purpose of that group, particularly in light of the new arrangements that were put in place in terms of national governance and reporting arrangements with the Angelini report, and recognising significant progress that had been made in the complaint space since the group was originally set up. So we met in early June, have agreed a refreshed terms of reference, and a further meeting will hopefully be taking place very soon, and this is referenced also within the PERCS report to the meeting. Finally, the report refers to some key benchmarking work that the team are continuing to progress and that we'll report back to members in due course. I'll pause there then and take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren. Are there any questions from the committee members? Thank you, Darren. I think it's a very clear report, and again, the commentary you've just provided there just demonstrates how collectively across the whole system between Police Scotland, SP, PERC, etc., there definitely has been that movement in. There's been an improvement in how complaints have been handled. So we're not at the end of the road yet, but I think it is important to acknowledge, a bit like Katrina said earlier as well, around there are some pockets. I mean, it's, in the grand scheme of things, overall number of complaints, etc., is, and there is some really kind of positive developments that have been happening, and I think that is really important to acknowledge as well. Grant, please. And you're on mute, Grant.
Apologies. Twice today I'm getting myself into a mess with that. Sorry about that. Darren, thank you for your report. In the actual cover paper, you talk about benchmarking, and you touched on that in your presentation just now. I wonder if you could give us some sort of clue as to at what stage you expect us to be able to understand what is being resulting from that exercise.
Chair, is it okay to come back in?
Yes, please. Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Grant. I suppose these are twofold. That there's some significant piece of work that we've been undertaking, which are not necessarily limited in the complaints and conduct space, but where complaints and conduct is a key focus, namely CASE, HMI, CFRS, where we're looking to understand the nature of the findings of those reviews, and how the position as covered in there compares to the position in Scotland. And my hope is that that work will be concluded well in advance of our next committee. Similarly, in terms of the work that we've been doing, looking at the situation in Northern Ireland and in England and Wales in relation to performance reporting, We would have been in a position probably to have brought something sooner, but for the fact that there has been more recent reports available. So we decided to pause to allow us to include the most recent information available from the PONI in Northern Ireland and the IOPC in England and Wales. And I suppose the point there is twofold. One, the point we discussed earlier on around about report development. What is the nature of complaints and conduct reporting that's available in the public space elsewhere within the UK? But equally, with a view potentially and recognising very different contexts that are in place across in terms of the respective legislation and arrangements that are in place across the rest of the UK, but the ability, hopefully at some point, to see actually how do we compare in terms of the number and the nature of complaints and how those are handled compared to other jurisdictions. So that's the intention. My hope is that I'll be able to provide something to you in advance of the next committee meeting.
Thanks, Darren. That's very helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Darren. Okay. If there are no other questions or observations on this agenda item, I think we are quite ready to move on to agenda item 5. And at this stage, we invite our colleagues from PERC to present their quarterly report to us. So, is it Ilya? Over to you. Or Phil? I do apologise. Who's kicking this off?
It's good morning, Chair. It probably will be myself. I'm not sure if my camera has come on. I can't see my.
No, you're in the dark. You're quite literally in the dark, Ilya. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, fantastic.
Let there be light. Very good. Good to see you.
Likewise. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. This morning, I have a pleasure of presenting our first update report for this financial year, covering Q1. The committee will see that the report is slightly different from the previous format, and I think there is a lot of additional information and context involved in our report. Just by way of introduction, you will note that at the end of the last financial year, we've undertaken a performance data review and extensive consultation. And from the 1st of April 2023, we have introduced new recording standards and counting rules internally. Generally, in terms of internal changes, you will see on page 5 our new key performance indicators, focusing on very robust initial assessment of the complaints files by the senior review officers within 5 working days. And in terms of the complaint handling reviews, we will now aim to conclude 80% of those within 90 working days from the receipt of background information from the policing bodies. In terms of changes that are affecting policing bodies, the key changes really are in relation to the timescales for the provision of the complaint files. You will note that previously we were asking policing bodies to provide those within 14 calendar days. We've now aligned our investigations and reviews team in terms of the information requests, and those will now be 15 working days. So in effect, allowing a little bit more time for policing bodies to put together all the necessary information and provide it to us. So these are probably the key changes that will be affecting the policing bodies. I think we're making putting significant focus on getting the information, all the essential information at the start of the complaint handling review process, to make sure that we do not need to pause the reviews once it commences. So significant focus on very effective, very robust assessment of the police complaint files, and making sure that any missing information is identified at the start of the process, and ensuring that the complaint handling review process thereafter is unaffected as much as possible. We have included some additional information for committee's benefit, just really providing a little bit more context, who we are, what we do, and also providing additional information in terms of potential disposals or the outcomes to the complaint handling reviews. In terms of the data presented in the report, you will see that in Q1, we've received 68 applications for complaint handling reviews, which is a 23% decrease from Q4. But if we look at the Q1 in the previous financial year, you will see a very significant increase of 48%. In terms of assessments carried out by our review team, all the new applications received by our team, as you can see, have been assessed within the 5 working days, which is our new target. From the previous counting rules, we've carried forward 30 complaint handling reviews, which were already ongoing as of 1st of April. By the end of Q1, 7 of those cases remained outstanding, and we're hoping to conclude majority, if not all of them, by the end of Q2. The report provided overview of the timescales for the provision of the police papers. You will see that in 91% of all requests, we've received the paperwork within 15 working days. The average was 7.5 working days. In 9% of cases, the paperwork was delayed somewhat. But you will see similarly, once the paperwork has been received and subject to an assessment by a senior review officer, the case is thereafter allocated to a review officer for progression. A further assessment is made, a very detailed assessment is made at that stage to identify any further information that might be missing. And the final information request is made at that stage before the complaint handling review commences. Again, those timescales are 15 working days, and PERC made 65 requests to Police Scotland as part of an ongoing review. And you will see that on average, those requests were completed within 14 working days. We have provided a breakdown by Professional Standards Department regions in terms of the time it took to provide the paperwork. You will see that perhaps PSD North has had a higher demand in terms of the number of requests made, and that potential has increased the average timescale for that region. Overall, in terms of the time spent waiting to receive the police complaint files, was 21.5 working days, which is a slight reduction of 2.5 working days from Q4 in the last year. So a slight improvement in that regard. In terms of complaint handling reviews on page 7, we have completed 42 complaint handling reviews during Q1, with 216 heads of complaint being reviewed. You'll see that the average head of complaint per CHR report is now 5.1. So again, perhaps echoing slightly the comments from our colleagues from Police Scotland, the complexity of the matters brought to us is gradually increasing. On the page 8, we provided some narrative and context in relation to discretionary decisions that on occasion we utilise in dealing with certain CHR applications. As you can see, we've highlighted that those would only be appropriate for a very minor, non-serious complaints. And in terms of Q1, 32 discretionary decisions were made during that period. 62% of those were on the grounds of proportionality. In other words, in our view, the complaints were relatively minor, and on the face of it, police have already taken reasonable steps to deal with the complaint, which may, perhaps means that in those circumstances, it would not be necessarily proportionate to take the matter for a review. On page 8 of the report, you will see a detailed breakdown of reasonably handled complaints nationally. Our figures is in the region of 62%. We've provided a regional breakdown just to provide the committee with a little bit more information in that regard. You will see PSD East and West are reasonably similar in terms of the performance, with PSD North just slightly behind those figures. The report provides a breakdown of the recommendations by type. Again, you will note not a great deal of movement in terms of recommendations requiring further response or further inquiry, perhaps a slight increase in terms of the recommendations asking Police Scotland to record individual allegations as a standalone complaints. So that may arise in cases where in our view, a number of complaint allegations were responded to as one overarching complaint. Again, on page 10, you will see a breakdown of the recommendations by PSD regions. You will see 66 recommendations made. 9 of those have been implemented during Q1. I've noted slight variation in terms of the data presented by Police Scotland. I think there is a potential that some learning points have been recorded as recommendations. I think there is a variable of 7 in those figures, and that potentially is just a matter of recording rather than anything else. More importantly, as you will see on pages 11 and 12, we have highlighted some of the more organizational learning that we've identified during Q1. We've provided some a narrative and context in relation to those learning points. Majority of the learning points that we identify focus on issues identified in relation to complaint handling itself, but naturally in the spirit of learning and improvement during complaint handling reviews, we identify opportunities to strengthen or improve the existing processes. So we've highlighted 3 of those organizational learning points as an example of tangible positive outcomes that can arise from complaint handling. So, and that's probably all the highlights for my section of the report at this stage. I don't know if you would like me to pause or if you would like to proceed with this second part of the report by Mr. Chapman.
I think we maybe proceed with the report. Bill, over to you, and then we can ask questions on the totality of the document. Thank you.
Thanks, morning, Chair, morning, committee. So the report is there to be read and noted. I'll provide some commentary and context round about it in terms of the number of referrals. Again, the numbers are relatively stable in terms of the picture of what we are seeing, noting the conversation that's already taken place in relation to TASER and PAVA, and just echo the comments made by Chief Superintendent Henderson. Moving through into the types of referrals, again, the numbers are there for noting. The incapacitant spray and the TASER showing out as the kind of main area of the referrals and the volume that we receive from Police Scotland. Again, the numbers are all there for the committee to consider. In terms of actual investigation, so these are the ones, the referrals that are made to us where a senior investigator makes an assessment of the referral to consider whether or not it is necessary and proportionate for the PERC to deploy resources and conduct a full investigation. Again, the numbers are contained on page 18. Notably 3 related to serious injuries following police contact, 2 in relation to serious injuries in police custody, 1 firearms presentation, and 2 TASER discharges. Many of these are still ongoing. In terms of the KPIs, again, they've changed since the 1st of April. You'll see there we're at 97%. So when we receive a referral from the police, we've got a 5 working day period following the receipt of the relevant background papers to conduct an assessment and decide whether or not it is requiring to go to a full investigation, sitting at 97%. Because of the change in the data and the counting rules, changing to 90 working days for the more serious, so those usually are death-related, significant inquiries. We now have 90 working days to complete those. We don't have any data because the first quarter obviously doesn't allow for the expiry of that time period. And then your category Bs and Cs, the more volume cases, we're looking at 120 days. Again, we'll get better statistics as we go through the calendar year in relation to that. A point of focus that we've tried to make in terms of the new style report is in relation to the PERC recommendations. I guess was a point that was raised by your colleague Fiona McQueen at one of the last meetings that I attended, where she asked for more focus to be put on. So if you're identifying a recommendation, what is it that police can do to then change systems, policy, practice, and so on and so forth. So where we can, we've included the recommendations, bearing in mind some of these matters will be sub judice because there may be some matters ongoing in the background in terms of prosecutions and so on and so forth. We've provided an update in relation to the general recommendation that we've made, what the police's response have been to discharge that recommendation, just so as a group, as a committee, you can have an awareness of the matters that the PERC are highlighting to the police that they need to consider. And then deliver a recommendation back to us. In terms of stakeholder engagement, quite a large focus activity being in the investigation space and the review space has been in continuous professional development of staff. As we emerge out of COVID, very little training internally and with liaison with the police. So we've continued in the theme that we will start to deliver continuous CPD events annually to our staff internally, but also and importantly continue the theme of the PSD PERC liaison event that we started last year. I think both organisations got a lot from it. There was a lot of candid discussions in both reviews and investigations, led to some short life working groups developing some trends and themes that then allowed for some changes in working practices and so on and so forth. So we're at the early stages of arranged in the next one, which will be October, November time this year. So hopefully once we have that, we can feed back any points that come out of note for the committee, and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, Ilya and Phil, for the report and the comprehensive narrative accompanying the report as well. Really helpful. I would like to invite members, and I see Paul would like to come in. Paul, please.
Yeah, I'm looking at on page 10, it says 66 recommendations made in Q1. 9 have been implemented, and the explanatory note underneath said Police Scotland have 2 months from issue to implement recommendations. Can I ask what percentage of the previous quarter have been implemented, and would it not be helpful to have the previous quarter stat in there if it takes 2 months, or if they have 2 months to work on that? Anyone?
Thank you, Paul. I don't have the data to hand to compare the rate of the implementation from Q1 from previous financial year. Is that what you're asking?
No. Q4 from previous financial year, because it takes Police Scotland, they've got 2 months to implement it. We've got a quarter is 3 months, so I'm not surprised it's only 14%. What is a more testing stat or more real stat for us would be that Q4 stat. That's kind of where I'm coming from. Do you see my logic?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we could potentially include that data. I think you're looking for the implementation rate. So yeah, it's something that we can look into. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Ilya. That certainly would increase the visibility of. It would present a more complete picture, I suppose, of how quickly and effectively are recommendations implemented. So really helpful. Brand, please.
Thanks, Chair. And Ilya and Phil, thank you again for your very clear report. I'm particularly was very pleased to read about the learning points identified on pages 11 and 12. And one of the things that struck me was particularly in number 12, it seemed to be that it seems to take quite a wee while to sort of reach agreement as to what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. And I wonder, are these two examples unusual, or are these indicative of what you would normally expect?
Thank you, Grant. I think in terms of individual learning points, which are ordinarily attached to specific complaint handlers, those are relatively easy to implement and action and cascade to staff. And I think in fairness to Police Scotland, those are ordinarily progressed relatively quickly to ensure that the learning is cascaded and that it remains effective, because the longer the longer time passes, the learning naturally diminishes. But in terms of the organizational learning, naturally, Professional Standards Department will look into how best to implement our learning points, but we understand that sometimes where those learning points, organizational learning points, are looking to change policies and procedures, we understand that there is a lot of, let's say, internal communication with different departments that requires to take place before things can be fully implemented. So in that regard, we continue to liaise with Professional Standards Department until all of those learning points have been implemented. But as I say, in terms of the organizational learning, some of that organizational learning can take a little while to be implemented, because, as I say, it's not just the professional standards that ordinarily are involved. So, for example, you can imagine if there is an amendment to certain forms, like a 6-stage form that Police Scotland use for recording their complaint handling process and inquiries. Trying to change that form will involve a lot of different departments, including different policy departments, the IT department, and so on. So as I say, organizational learning can on many occasions can take a little while to implement, but nonetheless, I think the important thing is that it is implemented, and we certainly are in regular contact with the Professional Standards Department to make sure that those learning points are implemented.
Thanks, Ilya. I suppose to some extent I was on page 12, the one where the Police Scotland's initial attempt to implement was formally rejected by PERC, suggests that actually there's a bit of dialogue needing to take place to sort of achieve a sort of meeting of minds in this. So over time, I think we'll learn quite a lot about how easy or otherwise it is for these to be an acceptable solution to be arrived at. But I would stress that I have found reading the report and the information in there, and including this sort of narrative, extremely helpful in understanding what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, Grant. And yeah, and certainly on this point, just around learning points, I mean, I had some of my observations were around that as well. I think these ones are really, really good examples of where a complaint or a series of complaints, whereas indeed a theme, can really indicate a need to improve a process or the procedure. So really, really helpful. And I suppose there is a part of me, and this is not trying to be unfair, because it's always kind of easier when you're coming in and reviewing something at slightly more of a distance. But these are the types of things that I'm sure Police Scotland are picking up, or should be picking up, as part of the complaints handling process. So it would be really good, I suppose, to draw out exactly these types of operational kind of improvements, because I think, as I say, it's probably easier to spot these things if you're seeing a trend at an arm's length. But I think, from a Police Scotland perspective, like these the learning point that Grant has zoned in on, which is, what is it? It's in relation to whether or not there's been interactions with people in police stations. And I'm thinking, well, why do we have? This is just an offside. So, but indulge me. I'm thinking, why in this day and age do we need to rely on recollection of officers? I mean, surely we have CCTV or some other kind of, things to really establish if it is indeed really relevant for the complaint, and the complaint, is, so there's a proportionality element of it. But some of these things, they yeah, we should, I think they're really, really good, because they're exactly those types of things that, I'm sure Police Scotland are drawing out as well, and it would be good to have more of that, I think, in this committee, as that really concrete evidence of learning from complaints. So no, really, really helpful section on the learning. Now, I don't see any other questions. I had a question, and particularly which is, I suppose, a relatively high level. So whenever it comes to changing of how we record data and count cases, there's always the question as to why. And I suppose I would quite like to have a little bit of public assurance that what are the reasons for your approach to changing the recording and the collection and presentation of data, and what is the positive impact on the robustness of your oversight over complaints handling that you're seeking to achieve by changing those recording and counting rules.
I can take that one, Chair. So the rationale for doing this was purely an internal organisational issue, which is that the PIRC, as some of you will know, started its journey many years ago as looking at specifically complaints handling as opposed to investigations. And over the years, various pieces of legislation and society's changed. With the inception of Police Scotland, the PIRC was then born as it now is today. What you had was two parts of our business internally which were operating effectively in isolation of each other, looking at the same types of material but through a different lens, one from investigations, one from reviews. Our categorisation in terms of cases was completely different in terms of categories A's, category B, category 1, category 2, which, to be frank, was confusing for me internally within the organisation, as well as then how do we present this data to the public or to our partners in fora like this, so that we've got a consistent approach. How we go about counting and making requests of the police, obviously not just Police Scotland, but all of the agencies and bodies that we've got oversight of. We had on one side of the business a 14-day period to provide material and 7 days on the other side. So to be frank, it was very much about just taking a consistent approach across all the domains within the PIRC, so that we are clear internally and externally what it is that we're doing. We haven't changed our approach in terms of most of the KPIs. Where we have changed is recognising the volume of work that the PIRC currently undertakes is significantly higher now than what it's been in the past. But there are obvious challenges in terms of finance, resource, and so on and so forth. Is that there was a recognition that the more serious cases, so your category A cases where it involves potentially a death, where you've got families and bereaved families who obviously are anxious to get to an understanding of what's happened, we are having to basically try and do those types of cases in the same period of time as we're doing, say, another complaint or another police referral. And we needed to come up with a mechanism by which we could then triage and prioritise our casework, recognising that our landscape in terms of resources is not going to significantly increase, but we have to be able to prioritise those cases where we believe it's in the public interest that we pursue them with more haste and report back, whether it be to the Crown or be back to Police Scotland or the policing body in that period of time. So that's the rationale behind it. There's not any kind of great particular systemic issue for an organisation. It's trying to make sure that we're being more consistent in our approach right across the two domains, so that when we come to meetings like this, in previous years, Elia would have been speaking about a category 1, 2, or 3, and I would have been speaking about an A, B, and C, and then everybody would be confused. So it's trying to make kind of speak with us the same language, even within the same organisation.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that, Phil. I think it's really helpful. So I suppose the assurance I'm taking from your explanation there is that it does indeed. So your change in approach strengthens the overall system and strengthens that just strengthens the system rather than actually trying to change something to make it either look better or whatever, you know. And I think that's, I just thought it was really important to make sure that everybody understands that. So okay, fantastic. Right. Well, thank you very much for this. Are there any questions, any further questions? No, for Phil or Ilya? No, fantastic. Well, in that case, thank you both very much for this. And we are ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is indeed the SPA dip sampling of Police Scotland complaints, and that's covered by Darren. Please, Darren.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So this report's brought to you in line with earlier update we provided previously around the reintroduction of our dip sampling process as a reintroduction of this quarterly exercise, which was previously paused due to the pandemic. The process of dip sampling, as was recognised by now Lady Angelini in her report, is a piece of good work which is intended to supplement wider audit arrangements. Before I go into kind of high-level summary, taking the report as read, I think I just really want to call out my thanks to Police Scotland, to Kat and the team for their help and assistance in this work. And I may well bring the team in terms of any specific questions. But really, in terms of the report itself, it's in two parts. The first one, specifically the dip sampling element, we looked at a sample of complaints within Q3 of last year, and the report identifies a number of findings and high-level recommendations, which I don't plan to go into any detail in just now. I think what I want to emphasise is that this is the restart of a dip sampling process. It's looking at a sample of complaints from one quarter. So, you know, caution is offered in terms of drawing firm conclusions. Albeit I would note that there is some alignment with the findings from the earlier joint audit by SP and the PIRC, as well as some of the key learning points we see coming through from the PIRC complaint handling reviews. The other element, and where I'm clear that I'm not talking about dip sampling here, is the process in terms of independent review of the handling in accordance with Police Scotland complaint handling arrangements in terms of complaints that arise in respect of the Professional Standards Department or Anti-Corruption Unit. And this is something which had been put in place following an earlier HMICS recommendation and is built into the Police Scotland complaint handling arrangements. And it's simply to say that in these circumstances, we look at all of the cases rather than a sample. You'll recall from previously ACC Spears describing that these are typically low in volume, that the point here is around about independence of review. However, when we looked to examine those cases from the earlier pausing of this work, we actually identified a number of additional cases that we weren't previously aware of. And rather than report to you, again, recognising small numbers, rather than report to you just now on a small proportion of those, it's our intention to look at the full volume of those cases that we're now cited on and to report back to the next committee. So very high level update. Happy to take any questions, and I may well bring in David or the team for anything that I can't answer, recognising that they did the bulk of the work in this space.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Darren, for the report and for this update. I will open it up to members for any comments or questions. Grant, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Darren, for this report, which is very clear. I've got one question, and it's really in the form of a continuous improvement form. It's on page 5, the final bullet on section 5, which talks about in 83% of the complaints, where applicable, the subject officer and the supervisor were advised of the complaint and that the matter had been resolved. On the basis that hopefully, if somebody has made a complaint about something, that one of the best ways of making sure it's not repeated is to make sure that is cascaded right down the line so that they know that there's been a complaint and how it's been resolved by frontline resolution, which is extremely positive, and we're all for encouraging that. But I wonder why it's not a higher percentage than 83%, because you'd almost expect that to be almost 100% of cases where the complainant was informed. Sorry, the officer concerned was informed about the complaint and how it had been resolved.
So is it okay to come back in, Katharina?
Of course, yeah, please, Darren,
So
yeah.
I may well bring in the team on this point. So David is on the call. I suppose firstly, the emphasis on the where applicable point here, because as you'll be aware, in terms of quality of service complaints, those are not complaints in respect of individual officers, but are more around the general nature of service provided. So David will confirm that the 83%, as I understand, is discounting any complaints where there isn't a subject officer, and therefore there is a 17% where actually we've identified that individual officers should have been notified, but that there's been a process issue here which we've picked up and that we've flagged back into Police Scotland. David, can you just confirm that what I've said is correct there?
Thank you, Darren. Yes, that's correct. But what I would also add that it may just be a recording issue, that perhaps there's certain complaints whereby maybe, as you mentioned, a process hadn't been followed through correctly, which is something we certainly pick up with Police Scotland separately.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Grant. Does that answer
Yes,
your question?
thank you. That clarifies it. You'll gather why I was asking the question. So if it can be dealt with, and if there's an overall learning process that affects the organisation, Police Scotland as a whole, it would be good to see if there's a way of picking up how that has then led to further action to try and actually avoid repeat complaints, because I think that's one thing that's not covered by the way this is reported.
Yeah. Thank you, Grant. Thank you. Katrina.
Thank you. I think I'm a bit concerned, or I would like to ask for some clarification, if possible, around the abandoned and time delays in response, and the connection between complaints taking longer than they're supposed to in terms of a response, and how that affects how people regard their complaint, and do they abandon them. I mean, the key findings are that out of the 80 cases reviewed, 51 were found to have been concluded within the stipulated 40 working days, which leaves 29, which is not quite, well, it's more than a third. So I wanted to see if there was any sort of clarification you could give me around that, and what the causes are, and what actions have been taken to address that. I'm curious about an apology is sent to the complainant about the time that's taken, and I'm just wondering, if I was thinking of myself as a complainer and it had taken, far too long for a response, whether I would just go, oh well, sorry, that's fine. I'm not sure what I'm actually asking, except I suppose I'm commenting around this, that I have some quite more questions around it.
Certainly.
I hope that makes sense.
It does. Katharina, are you okay to come back in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, maybe just Katrina, I think these are really, really good points. I had the same as well, and what's kind of going through my mind is this kind of Darren's caveat at the start of it, that these are very, very small sample sizes. I'm not sure how kind of reliable they are, and this is the first time we're seeing this. So I think we absolutely need to tackle those. I would definitely like to bring Darren in to see which of the points that you've raised he can answer. I'm just saying some of your questions probably need a more deeper kind of dive into this. So, but Darren, please, can you address some of Katrina's points?
Of course, yeah. Briefly, just to your point there, Katharina, this is a first sample, and therefore the extent to which this is typical or not of what we might see. Obviously, we're linking in with Police Scotland around these specific points that we've identified, around timescales, around about initial contact, and what that means in terms of potential abandoned complaints. For example, and we'll do that through the National Complaint Handling Development Group alongside the PERC, to look at what process controls are being put in place within Police Scotland, what if indeed there is a common theme here, or to prevent occurrences even in the minority. I think on some of these points, though, as I mentioned before, we do have the prior PERC joint audit, which does touch upon some of these areas. So record keeping, for example, as I recall, it talks around about abandoned withdrawal complaints, and therefore there is a degree of correlation there, and clearly the committee heard about the earlier audit, which did relate to a period some time ago, but where the committee will be expecting an update on Police Scotland's response to those findings, that our initial dip sample certainly correlates with.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Katrina. I've got a comment to make, which I think kind of draws all of this together a little bit, but I'll bring Paul in first. Paul, please.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the various average times taken from receipt of complaint to either conclusion, allocation, or whatever. And they're different for each one, because obviously with abandoned cases and with withdrawn cases, there's different things to report. But I'm curious, how long does it take for a criminal complaint to be allocated? Are these given higher priority than others?
Chair, I would be looking to my Police Scotland colleagues on this one.
Kat, can you shed some light on this?
Yeah, of course. So that's included in the risk assessment at the outset. So criminal, non-criminal. Where it's criminal, then that's clearly taken as a priority and allocated accordingly, Paul.
And do you know roughly how long that takes?
Immediately.
Oh, right, okay, that's fine.
So that would be picked up there and then.
Okay,
right.
Well, that's reassuring. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question, Paul. Right, so thank you very much for this report. Thank you for the discussion. I've also just realized in my notes, despite my best efforts, when we discussed the report around PERC, there was obviously a point that we made when we were looking at the open actions around the PERC performance report. But actually, once I've been because it didn't make sense to me, I have to admit, but I wasn't quick enough on my feet at the start of the committee. It takes a little while to get going. So I've consulted my notes, and actually this particular point did not relate to PERC. So I do, apologize for any confusion caused there. I think that action 011, so related actually to Police Scotland report. So where we were saying, consider and present data to provide assurance to the committee that complaints are handled in a risk-based manner, which is exactly what we've just been discussing. So if I basically look, so it wasn't actually related to PERC, it was more related to how do Police Scotland risk assess their complaints and how do they allocate them in terms of priority, etc. So if I consider that action, which we've had some explanation there, it's proposed to close, but actually we are still having the same questions. They're being surfaced now by members. And if I link this to what Darren is looking at through the DIP sampling exercise and the conversation we had around performance management being included and targets being included into the Police Scotland quarterly report, I actually can see how all of this ties together, because effectively some of the performance metrics that Darren is possibly looking at is something where I'd be really interested to see, what is Police Scotland's view on those metrics as part of the process. So it seems to me that actually that development of Police Scotland quarterly report and the STIP sampling needs to be aligned to some degree, so that when we're measuring certain things, we're having a perception from Police Scotland as to how well they're doing against certain metrics over time, and we have an independent corroboration of those same metrics, ideally through our dip sampling exercise, for example, because unless we align what it is that we measure and what is that we report, we keep talking apples and oranges. And it will forever be, I think, quite an unsatisfactory kind of conversation. So it seems, again, that what we need to do after this committee is to craft a series of actions, agreeing with Police Scotland around how do we move that definition of what it is that we measure, what we report on, etc. I think across all of the different, across all of the different parties who are involved, if members are content with that approach. And I see there's nodding. Grant, you'd like to come in?
Just to confirm that that's exactly why I was concerned when we were at the follow-up item, closing the PERC performance report number 11. I felt that we hadn't really drilled down into it. So what you're proposing, I think, is very much the right way forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. Okay. So, and I think that would go some way to addressing some of Katrina's points as well, some of the questions around and why and how and whatever. So we just need to get a better grip on this collectively. And I think, this is not insurmountable because it's not rocket science as well. So, so I'm sure we can get there. Okay, so really helpful. Thank you, Darren, for this report. I don't see any further points. So I think which means we are ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is and that is the Complaints and Conduct Committee work plan. I think it's with us for noting. And any comment? Sorry, apologies. I'm just going through my notes here as well. So, oh yes, of course, just in relation to our, Grant, go ahead.
Apologies, Chair. I appreciate that 27th February 2024 is a long way ahead, but as it's charted there, it seems to have relatively few items of business compared to 1st March 2023. So maybe it's something that just fills up over time, but it sort of looks a bit odd.
No, it's a very fair challenge, and I think we can absolutely we can look at that again offline as part of our agenda planning and just general work plan planning. So it's a really good point to note, Grant. Just in my notes as well, what I have is I know obviously we have been talking about having a joint audit plan with PERC, and I was wondering to what degree we're able to arrive at a joint audit plan, and because I'm quite keen again to make sure that that's incorporated into our work plan and we know what's happening, what's coming, etc. So is there potentially any position on this from my SPA colleagues or from PERC as to maybe from our colleagues from PERC if they're still on the call? I see Ilya still seems to be on the call. So can we maybe have being able to produce a joint audit report? Ilya?
Hi, Chair. Yeah, I think it would be fair to say I don't have an update for the committee at this stage, but I think certainly at the next meeting we should have a little bit more clarity in terms of a joint approach to the audits and dip sampling.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's make sure we don't lose sight of that, because it is incredibly important for us, and we need to know. So thank you, Ilya. I really appreciate that. Okay, so which means that this concludes our public session. If I've not lost my spot on the agenda, I do indeed think that this does conclude our session. So what